Hey guys, tonight we set sail on a stitched-together boat made from planks lashed with rattan and sealed with resin, drifting out onto a sea without GPS, maps, or even a reliable compass. The sun has just broken over the horizon, and already the hull creaks gently beneath your bare feet. You're not alone. Other sailors move wordlessly, focused, as if their senses are dialed into something you haven't learned to hear yet. The ocean smells like wet rope and faraway spices, and every ripple on its surface seems to be speaking a language you don't yet understand. Oh, and one more thing. You probably won't survive this. It's not personal. It's just that you've grown used to traffic lights and phone chargers, and you've never had to bet your life on reading the shape of a wave or the color of a cloud's underbelly. Ancient Malay sailors did this every day. With no formal navigation tools, they crossed vast oceans, threaded between islands, and found their way home again, sometimes months later, with little more than instinct, memory, and an uncanny ability to read the world around them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when people are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The boat rocks gently as you squat near the bow, gripping a rough-hewn rail smoothed by years of salt and hands. There are no instructions, just observation. Around you, the crew doesn't talk much. Communication is low, mostly gestural, built over years. You realize that language isn't the main way they operate out here. Their true fluency is in the sea. Someone taps your shoulder and points. Off to starboard, a subtle difference in the water's texture. A faint, diagonal ripple brushing across the dominant swell. You squint, and it just looks like water. But the sailor nods knowingly. That's not just water, it's direction. It's telling him where the swell came from, and by extension, where the wind last blew hardest. It's not unlike the way you might look at tire tracks in sand to figure out which way a car went, except the sand is moving and might drown you. These swells, called dabai in some island tongues, travel for hundreds of miles. A skilled navigator can stand in a canoe and, with knees slightly bent, feel how the swell interacts with the boat. Is it pushing from behind or slapping from the side? Does it rock in a slow, lazy motion, or is there a tense urgency in its rise? Historians still argue whether this kind of wave reading can be truly taught, or if it's more like tuning a radio with your whole body. You shift your feet and feel a shiver pass up through the soles. It's subtle, like when you're lying in bed and you can hear a truck a few blocks away before you even see it. That's the trick. The boat becomes an extension of your senses. You are no longer just standing on wood, you are listening through it. A story surfaces, one of those half-legend, half-logbook tales told by elders. A blind navigator once led a fleet safely through a reef-infested channel at night, simply by standing at the bow with his hand against the side of the hull. He could feel the vibrations of distant surf breaking over coral and knew exactly when to turn. Scientists have debated this. Some say the physics check out. Others claim it's just romantic embellishment. But you're starting to believe, at least a little. A crew member hands you a coconut shell dipped in salt water and then points to the horizon. You sip and it tastes wrong, astringent, bitter. He grins. Apparently that means you're getting close to the convergence zone where the coastal river outflows meet the sea. That strange taste in your mouth? It's a breadcrumb on a wet, salty trail. There's a rhythm to the day. Morning for orientation, afternoon for distance, evening for reflection. Every few hours you change position slightly, adjusting to the shifts in swell, the new tone of the breeze, or the angle of the sunlight bouncing off the waves. You begin to notice that even the color of the water changes with depth and direction. A sailor's eye can spot shallow coral by the aquamarine shift in hue. A darker patch? Could be a current, or worse, an upwelling. Basically the ocean's version of a pothole. One of the older crew members slaps a fish against the deck and mutters something under his breath. You assume it's a curse, but it might also be a weather report. The fish, a skipjack tuna, is smaller than usual for this region. A sign? Probably. The fish's migration is tied to currents, and currents are tied to wind, and wind is, well, everything out here. As goes the tuna, so goes your trip. And just like that, the boat creaks leftward. The captain gives a soft whistle, and the sail is adjusted. No charts, no debates, no iPads in sight. Just an intuitive sense that something out there has changed. Maybe a shift in swell direction. Maybe the way a cloud is building off the stern. You'd never know. But the crew trusts it, and you're learning to trust them. Night falls gradually, like someone pulling a dark blue blanket up over the sky. You realize you've made it through your first full day at sea with no compass, no map, and, miraculously, no existential breakdown. Just a bit of sunburn and the distinct feeling that the ocean knows more than you do. The ocean hasn't changed, but you have. You wake to the creak of the hull and the slow, lapping hush of waves against wood. The sea stretches in all directions, featureless, endless, a lazy blue desert. But now you know better. Now you know that what looks like sameness is actually a moving encyclopedia, and the pages are written in foam. You're handed a cup of something warm and earthy. It tastes like roasted rice and burnt sugar, which, given the situation, is a surprisingly good breakfast. Someone points again, this time not at the water, but at its surface texture. What you once thought was random chop is now a conversation. You stare, and then you see it. The sea has layers, not just depths, but personalities. One layer moves with a steady rhythm, the long sweeping swells that tell you what happened hundreds of miles away. Another dances with quick, irregular peaks, the result of local winds. They clash, they harmonize. It's a duet of forces, and Malay sailors, centuries before Doppler radar or marine forecasts, learned to read that duet like you might read sheet music. See that? Your shipmate murmurs. You see a strange V shape in the water ahead, like two wakes converging. That's a current boundary, possibly a meeting point of fresh and salt water, or maybe a place where one current slips under another. Either way, it's like a turn signal on a highway. Time to adjust. Wave reading isn't just about navigation, it's about survival. You come across something sailors call the confused sea. Chop coming from multiple directions, irregular patterns that feel like you're sailing through a bowl of angry soup. These are usually found near weather fronts or the confluence of multiple wind systems. They make steering harder and your stomach delicate. Historians still argue whether these techniques were formalized into systems or passed entirely through oral traditions and muscle memory. There are no ancient Malay sailing manuals, no diagrams tucked into bamboo scrolls. What survives are stories, songs, and gestures, a cultural echolocation. One of the crew taps his foot rhythmically on the deck. It takes you a moment, but then you hear it, the change in pitch when the boat glides from one wave pattern into another. It's not superstition, it's resonance. The hull sings differently depending on the swell it's riding. A trained navigator could stand with eyes closed and still know the sea's mood. It's not just what's underfoot. Overhead, the clouds offer their own cues. In the early morning, they pile gently in puffs to the east, fair weather friends. By midday, they've thickened and flattened, and by late afternoon, the telltale anvil of a cumulonimbus has started to bulge over the western sky. Thunder is likely, but more importantly, so is a wind shift. That means recalibrating everything. The crew watches the clouds the way a gambler watches dice mid-roll. There's a legend among these sailors of a man who could read the sea with his knees and the sky with his ears. It's said he once predicted a squall by listening to the change in bird chatter right before the horizon turned black. Do you believe it? Maybe. Then again, your legs are sore and your ears are full of salt, so who's to say? Wave height is another tool. Long before meteorology offered reliable measurements, Malay sailors had a vocabulary for waves. A bunga, meaning flower, is a gentle ripple, like petals on the surface. A lida, a tongue, is a quick, curling surge. Each type offers clues about distance traveled, wind history, and upcoming changes. You begin to sense why sailors needed poetry. The sea doesn't speak in numbers. It sings in metaphors. By midday, the sun is merciless overhead, but the breeze tells a different story. It's cool and slightly wet, a maritime air current, not a land breeze. That little hint tells you you're still far from shore. If you'd caught a dry gust, it would mean you're nearing landmass. But no such luck. You wipe your brow with a rag that used to be white. A strip of seaweed floats past, and the sailors lean over the edge like school kids spotting a celebrity. It's not just a plant, it's a region marker. Certain seaweeds grow only in specific temperatures and currents. If you've trained your eyes and your memory, you'll know where you are just from the flora clinging to your keel. Of course, not everything is decipherable. Sometimes a wave just slaps you in the face, and there's no great story behind it, just a grumpy ocean having a bad day. Still, you're beginning to get the rhythm. The sea isn't chaotic, it's cryptic. There's a pattern, a logic, but it doesn't hand it to you. You have to earn it. You have to show up every minute and pay attention like your life depends on it. Because it does. A fellow sailor nudges you and grins. He gestures in a wide, theatrical arc and then taps the side of his nose. You smile, even though you have no idea what that meant. Probably something like, "You're getting the hang of it." Or maybe, "You have seaweed in your nostril." Both are true. And then, you notice it. Not consciously. Not logically. But somewhere in the back of your brain, your balance adjusts just before the boat shifts. You anticipated it. You felt the tension in the wave before it crested. You're not leading, not yet, but you're beginning to follow. And that's the first real step to becoming part of the sea. The stars wake slowly, one by one, flickering through the blue-black velvet overhead like the sky is poking holes in itself to let the fire peek through. You lie on your back, a woven mat beneath you, your spine gently adjusting to the rhythm of the hull. There is no artificial light out here, no flickering bulbs, no glowing screens, just stars, thousands of them, an absurd, almost mocking number. But for the ancient Malay sailor, each of those points of light is a landmark, a map, a clock, a friend. A crew member shuffles beside you and hums a low tune. It sounds like a lullaby, but you realize it's a mnemonic. Each note ties to a constellation, each pause a directional cue. The song arcs from east to west, following the path of the stars that guide this night's journey. These aren't just twinkles in the sky. They're a celestial breadcrumb trail, and you're following it home. Of course, it's not just about knowing which star is which. Anyone can memorize Orion or the Southern Cross. The trick lies in how they rise and fall. Malay navigators watched the height of a star above the horizon, an angle measured not with sextants, but with outstretched hands and the width of fingers. Thumb to pinky was roughly 20 degrees. The old rule, 4 fingers above the sea. Stay your course. 2 fingers, adjust. Historians still argue whether this finger measuring technique was standardized across regions or passed down more organically, varying from island to island. Some believe there were star compasses encoded in oral chants, while others think it was more intuitive, learned on the water through countless cloudless nights. Either way, you start holding your hand up to the sky. It's both silly and deeply ancient. But not all stars are created equal. The guiding stars, as they're sometimes called, travel low and long across the horizon. These are the trustworthy ones, like Alpha Centauri in the southern sky or Altair, which the sailors here might call the eye of the swift bird. You learn that by watching where a star rises and where it sets, you can chart a straight path, assuming the sky stays clear. And the sky never ever promises that. There's also the matter of timing. The stars change with the seasons. The night sky you see in December isn't the same one that hung above you in June. Ancient Malay sailors marked their journeys by what star dominated the night, almost like celestial time stamping. You might remember a voyage as that trip under the Scorpion, or the night we turned back because the crab had risen too soon. It's a little romantic and a little terrifying, this reliance on stellar loyalty. Clouds roll in, your map is gone. A month passes, your map has changed. And yet they adapted. A memory of rising points, setting angles, and star families formed a living atlas that floated above them. It didn't rust, it didn't tear. It just required you to keep looking up. You begin to notice the dance. Not just the big, bold constellations, but the subtle flickers that pulse between them. One sailor gestures toward a trio of stars barely visible, calling them something that translates loosely to the gossiping sisters. They appear just before dawn in this season, and the older sailors tease each other. Miss those, and you'll miss the harbor. There's also the moon, of course. Though less reliable for direction, it tells its own stories. The moon's position and phase inform tides, currents, and mood. Sailors speak of the pulling moon, when emotions rise and arguments tend to spark. You laugh until a minor scuffle breaks out near the water jar. Must be a crescent tonight. A shooting star rips across the sky and someone mutters a wish. You wonder what ancient sailors wished for. Calm seas? A good landfall? Or just a hot meal and a hammock that didn't swing? You're handed a piece of dried fish and a sliver of mango. Night snacks. Not bad, really. Better than half the airplane food you've had. You chew slowly, letting the sky fill your eyes. Then someone calls out from the stern. The water ahead has turned glassy, mirror-like. The crew moves with quiet purpose, adjusting the sail to catch the soft, whispering wind. The stars reflect in the water now, like a map duplicated, above and below. This is the secret part, the part you'd never know from a textbook or a museum exhibit. Ancient Malay sailors didn't just look at the stars, they looked through them. They aligned the stars with their reflections on the sea's surface. If a star's reflection lay directly beneath the original, the boat was oriented correctly. If the reflection slid left or right, it was time to correct course. That means, essentially, these sailors created a floating celestial compass, visible in both sky and sea. It's a method so intuitive and so impossible to replicate with modern tools that scholars still debate whether it was ever truly widespread or only used by an elite few. But here, on this boat, it's gospel. You lie back again, the salty wood warm beneath your shoulders, and watch as the stars shift by inches. The sky is not still. It's in motion, sliding silently from one side of the world to the other, and you, little speck of humanity, are moving with it. Not because of a glowing screen or a digital app, but because someone once taught someone else how to watch the stars and remember their names. A breeze kisses your cheek. Someone laughs softly in the dark, and you realize this map is alive. The stars begin to fade, bleached by the slow creep of morning light, and with them, your celestial guide quietly vanishes behind a gauze of gray. But before you can even miss them, the wind picks up, and the boat shifts. You feel it first in your ears, that soft, rising hush, like a giant's sigh skimming across the water. Then in your nose. The air grows wetter, more tangy, almost metallic. And finally, the sail flutters in protest as it catches a new direction. The captain steps up, holding out his palm flat against the wind, then slowly turns his hand to angle with it. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He's listening, not with ears, but with skin. Malay sailors had a name for this, the 8 breaths. They believed the wind had 8 distinct personalities, like recurring characters in a long, predictable drama. Each direction had a feel, a smell, even a mood. Coming from the northeast, dry and cutting, perhaps signaling the monsoon. From the southwest, moist and heavy, full of rain and promise. The sailors didn't need meteorology charts, they just needed noses and patience. You try it. Stick your hand out, fingers spread. The wind pushes against the soft webbing of your skin, and you think, maybe you feel what they felt. Not just a breeze, but an instruction. A gentle push in the right direction, if you're listening. But this isn't just a poetic flourish. It's navigation. The direction and behavior of wind helps you triangulate your position with other signs, waves, sun, currents, and yes, the occasional confused seabird. Historians still argue whether the 8-breath system was a fixed theory or a looser framework. Some say it may have originated in India or Persia and spread through the trade routes. Others argue it developed independently across many Austronesian seafaring cultures. You suspect both are true. Cultures that live on the sea tend to arrive at similar truths, even if they take different roads, or in this case, different winds. The crew adjusts the sail once again, a smooth, practiced motion. No winches, no gears, just strength and rhythm. The sail itself is curious, woven from layers of palm leaf and cotton, patched more than your favorite old t-shirt. But it works. It flexes and breathes with the wind like it's alive. One sailor points to a dark streak on the horizon. You barely see it, just a subtle thickening of the air in one slice of sky. That's the morning gust, he says, then grins. She always comes a bit late. You wait. And sure enough, a stronger puff arrives, lifting your hair and nudging the boat with purpose. It's like the sea got a second wind, or a punchline. Here's a curious fact. These sailors also use the sound of the wind as a guide, not just its direction, but its pitch. A low, hollow whoosh means steady. A high, whining whistle against the sail's edge. You're probably going too fast for the conditions, or the gods are annoyed. Either way, pay attention. And the sails aren't your only tools. Your ears become finely tuned to everything. How the wind whispers against the wooden hull, how it flutters through loose fabric, even how it changes when bouncing off the nearby crew's chests, like wind chimes without the chimes. But winds don't always play fair. Sometimes they disappear. The dreaded doldrums, a calm that isn't peaceful so much as oppressive. You hit one just before lunch. The sea goes flat, the sky turns blinding white, and the air gets so still, it feels thick enough to chew. There's no breeze, no movement, no hint of what comes next. The sail hangs like a forgotten curtain, limp and sulking. In these moments, it's the crew's patience that amazes you. No panic, no flailing, just acceptance. A slow, resigned rolling of cigarettes, the clink of a coconut being cracked, and someone humming an old song about winds that went missing. You lie back, squinting at the pale sky, and wonder, how did these sailors cross such vast distances relying on something as fickle as the wind? But then again, maybe wind isn't fickle. Maybe it's just misunderstood. The problem isn't that it disappears. It's that we expect it to obey us. And Malay sailors, they never expected obedience. They expected relationship. They treated wind not like a tool, but a guest. Welcome it. Read its moods. Don't rush it. That mindset might not power a cargo ship, but it will get you home, eventually. Someone finally stirs. The wind returns, not dramatically, just a gentle nudge, and the sail catches again. The boat breathes in, and you breathe with it. Even as you sail on, you're reminded of how ancient navigators marked wind shifts, not just in real time but over seasons. They tracked how monsoon patterns returned like migratory birds, how the dry season crept up with a scratchy, persistent breeze. Entire calendars were built around the wind's rotation. Trade, war, weddings, all synced to these invisible whispers. One crew member lifts a bundle from the storage hold, small flags made of cloth, feathers, and shells. They're wind markers, used during training. Not for this seasoned crew, but for younger sailors still learning which direction was the breath of the highlands and which came from the mother's hand. You touch one. It's rough and worn, and you imagine it fluttering years ago on a smaller boat with fewer stars and more doubt. You're learning too. Learning that the sea doesn't need your understanding, but it rewards your respect. And maybe, just maybe, the wind has started to recognize you. Or at least, it's stopped laughing quite as hard. The sky brightens as the morning sun claws its way out of the horizon, but your attention has already drifted somewhere else, upward toward the flutter of wings. It starts subtly. A faint shadow glides across the sail, then another. You glance up. Overhead, a small flock of seabirds cuts across the sky, gliding with a purpose you can't quite place. They're not circling aimlessly, not diving for fish. They're heading somewhere. Your crewmate doesn't even look up. They're going home, he mutters. You stare a little longer and realize he's right. These birds aren't hunting. They're commuting. And just like that, you're introduced to one of the cleverest tricks in the ancient sailor's toolkit, the birds. Malay navigators paid close attention to avian traffic. Not all birds, of course, just the ones with dependable habits. Frigate birds, for example, are long-distance gliders that never land on water. If they're overhead in the afternoon, that usually means land is within 40 to 50 kilometers. They've been out all morning, hunting offshore, and now they're headed back. You track their path like living compass needles, pointing toward unseen shores. Then there are terns, smaller, twitchier, the caffeine addicts of the seabird world. They stay closer to land and often leave and return in reliable shifts. If you spot them darting past after sunrise, they're probably on their way out to forage. See them again in the late afternoon. They're heading back. That direction. That's land. But of course, no system is perfect. A rogue wind might scatter a flock. A hungry bird might venture farther than usual. Historians still debate whether sailors genuinely used birds for precise navigation or simply took them as hopeful signs. It's likely a bit of both. You're not charting coordinates here. You're adding another puzzle piece to a complex mosaic of ocean clues. One old tale tells of a sailor who trained himself to mimic the cry of the red-footed booby. Legend says the birds would answer if they heard the call near dusk, revealing their direction in reply. Whether true or not, your shipmates chuckle when you try. Your version sounds more like a sneezing duck. Still, you watch the birds differently now. They're not just sky clutter, they're scouts, and they're more reliable than any rumor. There's even a curious trick you learn while on night watch. One sailor wakes you just before dawn and silently points to the stars. You think it's another astronomy lesson? But then, there's movement, a blot against the stars, a bird flying high and fast. You wouldn't have noticed it if you weren't already staring skyward. Those are the home flyers, he whispers. They come early, before light. You learn to associate not just the shape of wings, but their rhythm. Frigate birds glide with long V-shaped wings and barely flap. Terns flap quickly, nervously. Tropic birds, those fancy creatures with long white tail streamers, swoop like dancers at a wedding you weren't invited to. Your own eyes begin to sharpen. You start to pick up the nuances. Birds flying low and erratic are probably still hunting. Birds in straight lines, high and fast, probably headed for land. And it's not just sight. Sometimes, in the pre-dawn stillness, you hear them before you see them. A high-pitched screech, a distant caw. The sound slices through the soft ocean breeze like a secret message. You start listening harder. At one point, a crewmate jokingly suggests you plug your ears and let the birds draw the map with their song. You try it. For a few seconds, it almost works. Of course, not all bird encounters are so elegant. One afternoon, a shaggy-looking bird actually lands on the boat. No grace, no ceremony, just a plop and a slight look of embarrassment, like it's realized halfway through that this isn't the right stop. It stares at you, blinking, then poops on the deck and flies away. A reminder, nature may be mystical, but it's also deeply indifferent to your feelings. Still, the knowledge builds. Bit by bit, birds become something between signposts and messengers. You ask more questions. The crew tells you tales, some surely embellished, of birds that led sailors to freshwater lagoons or warned of storms. Of one island where a sacred bird appears only when it's time to fish. Of another where catching a certain bird is considered bad luck for an entire voyage. Whether you believe the myths or not, the system works. Every time you see birds heading west in the evening, land follows. Maybe not right away, maybe not for hours, but it's there, waiting. And here's the best part. The birds aren't trying to help. They're just living their lives. But in doing so, they give away secrets. It's like the sea's version of people watching in a train station. If you observe carefully enough, you learn where everyone's going. As dusk sets in again, a familiar silence settles over the deck. The wind hums low, and above, a slow arc of birds makes its way across the sky, silhouetted in gold. No fanfare, just wings against light. They are going somewhere they've been before, and now, so are you. Afternoon thickens like syrup, heavy with heat and distant thunderheads, when one of the crew lifts a finger to the air and mutters something quietly. It's not a warning exactly, more like a hunch. You lean into the wind and smell it too, the faintest trace of rain. Not the sharp metallic scent of a thunderstorm, but something gentler, earthy, almost sweet, and impossible. You're still hours from shore. But that's the trick. Rain speaks early, and Malay sailors learned to listen. They didn't need weather apps or barometers. They had clouds, humidity, and yes, the taste of rain on the tongue. A sailor reaches into a small container and wets a strip of cloth, then holds it up like a priest offering incense. It's not superstition, it's water sampling. The flavor of collected rain was often tested to distinguish between pure mid-sea rainfall and rain carried inland over the jungles. A sour tang might mean it swept over trees, a milder, neutral taste, open sea. Not just hydration, but orientation. You reach out a hand and feel a single drop, fat, warm, and oddly deliberate. It's not quite raining yet, just teasing. Above, the clouds have begun to layer, the lower ones thick and leaden, the higher ones feathered, tinged with yellow. You're told to watch those layers closely. Their shape and depth help predict wind changes and whether the squall coming is one to ride through or one to wait out with the sails tied tight and heads bowed. Historians still debate whether ancient seafarers used a formal rain calendar or just accumulated intuitive knowledge over decades. Some scholars propose that stories and chants contained encoded meteorological knowledge, like the appearance of frog-colored clouds, meaning 3 days of drizzle. Others think it was all just passed down like family recipes. A pinch of cloud, a dash of humidity, stir until worried. The crew shows you more tricks. One points to a particular sort of cloud that's dark but has a clean underside. That one, he says, will dump heavy rain and be gone before dinner. Another cloud is taller, bruised with purple at the edges. Ominous. You make a mental note, though you're pretty sure by the time you recognize those signs on your own, you'll already be soaked. There's another clue. Ripples on the surface of the sea, not from wind this time, but from the rain approaching. You start to notice the difference. Wind ripples move in long trails. Rain makes a softer, more anxious texture, like tiny feet pattering on a drumhead. And then it arrives. Not as a wall, not all at once. It begins with a mist, a thin veil that cools your face and wakes up the deck. You taste it instinctively, part curiosity, part ritual. It's fresh, mid-sea. You feel slightly proud of yourself, like you've just passed the world's weirdest sommelier test. Rainfall itself wasn't just a curiosity. It was, and still is, a strategic resource. Ships like these carried no fresh water reserves, just catchment systems made of coconut husk filters and carved bamboo tubes. When rain began, the crew leapt into coordinated action, stretching out cloths, setting up catch basins, and sometimes just tilting their heads back gratefully. Even now, several crew members begin gathering rainwater. One uses a paddle to sluice water off the sail into a half barrel. Another wrings out his soaked sarong over a jug. You consider helping, but your current job seems to be, don't get in the way. You succeed. Barely. But it's not all so practical. Rain means pause. Work slows. Stories drift lazily out like incense smoke. Someone recalls a voyage where it rained for 5 days straight, and the only way they navigated was by taste, testing the water each morning and matching it to memory. Another tells of a man who could smell rain an hour before it arrived, just by how it changed the scent of his boat's mast. You raise your eyebrows, skeptical. The crew laughs. It's true, one says. He had a nose like a jungle dog. You smile, and part of you believes it. The rest of you just wants that guy's nostrils for tomorrow. A sailor points to a rainbow forming in the west. You admire it for a moment, thinking only of its beauty, but then you're corrected. Not just pretty, he says. It means the sun is behind us. Basic science, sure, but in the middle of a gray-blue nowhere. Sometimes it's the simplest details that keep you from going in circles. Rain eventually slows, leaving the woods slick and the sails heavy. The crew wrings out what they can. You help this time, pulling on a cord that sends a satisfying stream of water down onto the deck. And you realize something. Even the rain, something you once thought of as nuisance or mere backdrop, is a part of the navigational symphony. Not a separate interruption, but an instrument, a changing note in the day's composition. As the clouds begin to part and a shy sun peeks through again, the sea brightens, but subtly, a shift in color, a shimmer in the chop. You're learning to see the difference between blue and blue, to feel meaning in moisture. You are not yet a sailor, but you're no longer just cargo. You're not sure what you hit first, the slick hump of muscle or the wall of smell. It's just after midday, and the water has calmed into a lazy lull, the boat gliding with barely a whisper. Then there's a thud beneath the hull, not jarring, more like running into a submerged mattress, and the boat gives a gentle bounce. The crew freezes. For a second, nobody breathes. Then, a long shape arcs out of the water beside you, gleaming gray and barnacle-speckled, before slipping back under. You've just bumped into a whale. The crew relaxes immediately, even chuckles. One of them mimes you fainting, which seems fair. Apparently, it's not uncommon, especially in deeper waters where currents carry plankton blooms and whale families gather to feast. You didn't see it coming, and neither did the whale. An accidental nudge in a vast ocean. Still, it leaves your heart racing and the air rich with whale breath, a smell halfway between steamed broccoli and wet dog. More importantly, it gets you thinking about sound. Malay sailors didn't have sonar, but they understood how sound behaved over water. They used it, relied on it, not just for locating other vessels or pods of sea life, but for feeling distance, even presence. You start to notice it too, the way the ocean sounds different in certain places. When the water deepens, the slap of the waves against the hull becomes hollow, cavernous. In shallower regions, especially near coral reefs, the sounds turn crisper, sharper, like fingers tapping porcelain. Sailors could tell how far from land they were just by how the sea spoke back to them. There's also the matter of echoes. A crew member shouts, not loud, just a sudden bark of syllables, and waits. You think he's being weird until he grins and points out a faint return. Not a true echo like off canyon walls, but a delay, a softness, a sense that the sound traveled, bounced off something, and came back. Likely a shoal or a cliffed island ahead. Historians still argue whether this was active echolocation or just intuition built over years. The academic jury's out, but the practical evidence floats around you in living form. These sailors don't test theories, they sail by them. That whale, it becomes a story, a lucky omen. Someone jokes that the sea bumped back to remind you who's in charge. But beyond superstition, there's reverence. Whales are signals too. Their presence can mean rich feeding grounds, calmer waters, or deep trenches nearby. They're not navigational tools per se, but their appearance tells you something's shifting. Then there's the deep, wordless sound the sea makes on its own. One of the crew lays flat against the hull with an ear pressed to the planks. You mimic him. At first, you hear nothing but the blood in your ears and the occasional creak. Then, faintly, you hear a low, continuous drone. Not the boat, not the wind. The sea itself, humming. This low-frequency vibration is caused by currents pushing against ridges below or by distant underwater turbulence. And incredibly, Some sailors could feel these vibrations and know what lay ahead. A drop-off, a trench, maybe even the edge of a reef shelf. It's like trying to read Braille on a moving subway, except the text is water and the reader is mostly barefoot. In quieter moments, the boat itself becomes a musical instrument. You hear different creaks and groans depending on the swell, the wind angle, even the humidity in the air. One night, a crewmate claims the hull complained before a squall. Sure enough, the next morning brings wind and a choppy sea. You start paying closer attention to every squeak. One story told during a calm spell involves a blind sailor. Again, this guy comes up a lot, who could steer through narrow island passages at night simply by tapping the oar on the side of the hull and listening for changes in echo. Wide open water sounded one way. Nearby rock faces changed the pitch. His world was made of sound. You smile at the idea. Then someone hands you a paddle. You tap. Wait. Tap again. You think you hear something. Or maybe you want to. The crew doesn't mock you. One man nods encouragingly, as if to say, keep listening. And you do. By sunset, you're aware of the ocean as a living soundscape. Not just wet noise, but language. The slap of wavelets against wood, the hiss of sea foam under speed, the gentle thrum of rope against sail, the random splash of a flying fish skipping like a stone. Even your own heartbeat seems to slow, sinking to the sea's rhythm. Sound isn't just information here, it's comfort, it's presence. When land is out of sight and clouds obscure the stars, sound tells you, you're still here, still moving, still going somewhere. And sometimes, that's all the direction you need. As the last light fades, the crew begins to hum, low, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. You don't know the words, but it doesn't matter. The sea hums along, and somewhere beneath your feet, the whale hums too. The day begins not with the sun, but with a scent. Before light spills across the deck, before the birds stir overhead, your nose catches something, faint, earthy, strangely green. You sit up groggily, sniff the air like a suspicious cat, and glance around. Nothing but endless sea. But that smell? It's not imagination. It's land. Malay sailors had names for these scents. Angin darat, or land winds, breezes that blow offshore and carry with them a bouquet of clues. It's subtle, this olfactory signposting, but it's real. You can smell land before you ever see it. Someone confirms your suspicion with a nod and a casual point eastward. Wetwood and Pandan, they say. Maybe a river mouth. You try again. Yes, now that they've said it, you can place it. Damp soil, fresh leaves, the tang of distant mud. A scent like someone just peeled open a forest and let it breathe. Smell, it turns out, is one of the most ancient navigational cues. When you're at sea for days or weeks, your brain learns to filter ocean smells, salt, fish, rope, sun-warmed wood. So when something new enters the mix, even if it's only a whisper, it stands out like perfume on a blank page. It's not always so fragrant. Some islands smell of guano, others sulfur. One sailor tells a story about navigating toward a peppery smell that turned out to be a grove of flowering ginger trees. Another swore he smelled cooking fires long before they saw a single palm. And you believe them now, because your own nose is starting to distinguish the symphony of the air. The crew talks about morning smells versus evening smells. Land, warmed by the sun all day, breathes out its aroma in the cooling hours. So if you catch a forest's breath in the early morning, land is likely close and upwind. But if it hits you in the late afternoon, you might have sailed past without noticing. They use these clues to adjust course, like following a trail of invisible incense. Historians still argue whether this technique was instinctual or ritualized. Some think sailors trained their noses with different island flora. Others argue it was mostly subconscious. But ask the crew and they'll tell you, if you can't smell home, you'll never find it. You begin to test yourself. You sniff the air periodically, trying to isolate different threads. Is that banana blossom? Wood smoke? Coconut oil? You're probably imagining half of it. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's there. Something unmistakable. Something not see. Smell also reveals what words can't. One sailor recounts a near miss. They were headed toward what they thought was a safe harbor until someone caught a whiff of rotting fruit, maybe. They altered course and avoided an uncharted swampy reef island choked with stagnant tide pools, saved by the nose. You look around and realize that smell also dictates how people behave on board. When the wind shifts and the air turns green or smoky, the crew moves with more purpose. Ropes are adjusted, sails shifted, water checked. No fanfare, no shouting, just a shared understanding, like animals moving before an earthquake. There's a beauty to this, trusting your senses again. You've spent so long surrounded by artificial signals, buzzes, beeps, blinking lights, that your body forgot what real cues feel like. But here, a single breath of wind can reroute the entire boat. A crewmate hands you a strip of cloth, dark and worn. "Smell this," he says. You do. It smells like wood, oil, and something bitter. "Island near Celebes," he explains. "They boil bark into dye. You smell it before you see the beach. It's a teaching tool, a scent catalog, not unlike a wine sommelier handing you a cork and saying, 'Now remember that for when you're lost in the fog.'" Some boats kept bundles of these scent clues, tucked in oilcloth or bamboo tubes, fragrant memories used to test wind patterns or confirm a direction. You imagine a sailor, low on supplies, unsure of his heading, pulling out one of these bundles, sniffing deeply and saying, "Home is that way." It's almost absurd, but not here. And it's not just human sense. The ocean delivers botanical hints too. Driftwood, leaves, even seeds. You spot a single coconut bobbing past the boat like it's on vacation. It's a clue. Not just that land is nearby, but which land. Different islands grow different palms. A sharp-eyed sailor might know a Tahitian coconut from a Sumatran one by the shape of its husk or the faint color of the shell. You suddenly recall all those pirate movies with treasure maps and eye patches. Not one of them ever showed a sailor stopping to sniff the wind like he was evaluating cologne. Yet here you are, nose in the air, following your face like a hound with a compass. It's evening again, and the wind turns ever so slightly. The air warms, carries a scent that feels thicker, richer. Something sweet, something alive. One of the crew leans on the rail beside you and mutters, "Tomorrow we see trees." You believe him. Morning breaks with a gift from the sea. Not a dolphin leaping joyously beside the hull, nor some golden sunrise lighting the waves in poetic perfection. No, what catches your eye is far humbler. A clump of driftwood, tangled with seaweed, and a single bright yellow flower still somehow clinging to its stem. You blink, rub your eyes, and lean forward. The crew gathers too, not hurried, not surprised, just quietly attentive. One reaches down with a long hooked paddle and snags it. The whole bundle is hauled aboard, dripping, fragrant, and buzzing with possibilities. This is how the ancient Malay sailors did it. Floating debris wasn't just trash or coincidence, it was evidence. Proof, like breadcrumbs on the ocean's floor, showing what had passed through. And more importantly, from where. You kneel beside the bundle. It's sticky with salt, but smells fresh. You're told the flower is from a type of tree that only grows near freshwater riverbanks. That means land, real land, is nearby. Maybe upstream, maybe just a few miles ahead. Or maybe you've passed it, and the tides are pulling stories backward. Debris tells tales. Coconuts, wood chips, fruit husks, and even insects, each carried from shore, tumbled by waves, and left afloat like tiny drifting reporters. Ancient sailors became skilled interpreters of these soggy messages. A cracked bamboo stalk? Possibly a raft that broke apart. Burnt wood? A cooking fire upstream. And in one memorable story, a whole basket of salted fish floated past, still tied neatly. The sailors that found it assumed its owners drowned, and changed course immediately, just in case the sea was in a mood. Historians still argue whether debris reading was a primary method of navigation, or more like a backup, a pleasant surprise rather than a plan. But aboard your boat, it feels like a routine check, not a miracle. Just another part of the living, moving sea map. As the sun rises higher, more clues drift past. A piece of woven palm frond, likely from a roof, a tangle of reeds with a beetle still clinging to it, a broken sandal, its thong gnawed by time. Someone suggests the sandal is heading home. Another says, maybe it's just tired. You begin to appreciate the intimacy these sailors had with materials. They could tell where something came from based on the color of the fibers, the knotting of rope, the species of tree. It's not unlike detectives solving a case, except here, your crime scene is the open ocean, and your clues float by one at a time, waterlogged and hopeful. It's not just about finding land, either. Debris was used to estimate current direction and speed. If you drop a marked stick and watch how it moves compared to your boat, you can tell how strong the surface current is. You try it with a half-gnawed mango pit. It bobs, swirls, then speeds ahead of you. A crew member nods. "We're riding the mouth," he says, referring to a known current that pulls north in the early wet season. There's also the drift pattern of debris. Floating plants often align with the wind direction, while heavier items like fruit pods move more with current. When both line up, you're on a fast route. When they split apart, time to adjust. It's like the sea giving you a shrug. You figure it out. One sailor shows you a tiny crustacean clinging to the underside of a branch. "See this?" he says. "Just arrived. Not enough time to latch tight. That means we're close." You stare at the little creature, which obligingly does nothing. But you believe him. Of course, not all debris is helpful. One year, a distant volcanic eruption dumped ash and debris so thick that entire channels were jammed. Sailors mistook the floating wood for signs of land and found themselves stranded, caught in the middle of nothing. One sailor on your boat claims his father had to chew rain-soaked sailcloth just to keep hydrated. You ask if he's exaggerating. He smiles. Doesn't answer. Probably both. Even floating smells matter. That pungent seaweed odor, likely from the shallow beds near reef islands. The faint whiff of ferment. Could be overripe fruit bobbing in a river mouth upstream. The crew knows every scent by heart. You're still guessing, but you're trying. You spot a battered coconut drifting past and call it out excitedly. One of the crew glances over, unimpressed. "Too clean," he says. "Been in water too long." You deflate slightly. He claps your back. "Still learning. You've got the eyes." Later that afternoon, someone pulls a reed mat fragment from the water. It's stained with something purple. "Dye from a fishing village," someone says. "We'll hit land by sunset." And indeed, as the sky begins to bronze, you spot something on the horizon. Small at first, just a smudge in the distance, a place where the sea seems to change texture. You squint. Is that a line of trees? A slope of green? The crew doesn't cheer, doesn't even point. They just smile quietly and get to work adjusting sails. After all, they already knew it was coming. The debris told them hours ago. You stand at the bow, watching the shape grow sharper. From a few floating scraps, a story unfolded. Not fantasy, not magic. Just the oldest kind of reading, not of words, but of the world. And now you're part of the story too. Washed up here, somewhere between the current and the wind. You'd think the sun, bold and center stage in the sky, would be the most trustworthy guide. It's not. By midday, the ocean has turned into a shimmering trickster, flat and blinding. The sun hangs straight overhead, offering no helpful shadows, no clear east or west. Everything gleams, everything glares. You squint through your lashes and see only white gold reflections. No lines, no horizon, just a blank canvas soaked in light. Welcome to equatorial noon. The great solar betrayal. Malay sailors, of course, knew this moment well. Around the equator, the sun at midday isn't low and slanting. It's nearly vertical. That means no shadows on your sail, no helpful compass from the sun's position. Just a slow roast on a swaying oven tray. But they had tricks. One of the crew pulls out a carved stick, a short rod notched with tiny grooves. It's placed upright on a wooden plate in a flat, shaded basin of water. After a few seconds, he gestures to the edge of the shadow forming inside the bowl. It's faint, barely perceptible, but it's enough. The shadow's angle tells him the boat has begun drifting slightly northward. This humble shadow bowl, a kind of floating sundial, works because of the subtle movement of the sun away from dead center. It's the difference between being completely lost and confidently off course, which, by seafaring standards, is doing just fine. Historians debate whether such tools were common or rare, ritual or routine. Some believe they were shared between certain clans or only used during long-haul voyages. Others think they were personal creations, developed over time by individual navigators, like carving your own compass, except the needle is sunlight and your map is a puddle. But even without tools, sailors used the sun in clever ways. By morning and evening, its angle on the sail could hint at direction. If your left arm was warm and your right stayed cool, you were likely angled west. Sailors learned to feel direction with their skin. Literally. You try this now, holding your arms out like you're signaling an imaginary airplane. The heat difference is real. One forearm burns, the other doesn't. It's ridiculous. It's genius. At night, the sun's residual memory lingers in the ocean itself. You hear the crew mention sun lanes, those brilliant streaks of light reflected off the water. Early morning lanes point west. Evening lanes, east. These glowing trails were used like celestial arrows when stars were hidden or winds too erratic to trust. But what about the overcast days, when the sky is just gray on gray and the sun sulks behind layers of cloud? That's when you look down. Malay navigators knew the ocean itself reflected sunlight differently depending on the time of day and angle of entry. The color of the water deepens with the shifting sun. Morning seas are often pale, even greenish. Midday brings bright silver. Evening turns the water deep blue, then almost black. You learn to see these changes not just as moods, but as signals. One sailor drops a carved wooden ring onto the deck and watches where the light reflects inside it. Another squints at a puddle near the mast, pointing out how the glint shifts from one corner to another. It's like watching the sun play hopscotch across a mirror. And there's another trick, using the sun's heat to predict rain. As noon stretches on, One of the crew puts his palm against the mast. "Not hot enough," he says. "Rain's coming." You frown. The air feels stifling. But sure enough, hours later, fat drops begin to fall. Not enough to soak, just enough to cool the deck. Sunlight and humidity have a relationship here, and the crew listens to their arguments like eavesdropping on a cranky couple. You also learn that shadows do exist, even at high noon, if you know where to look. The curve of a hull, the lip of a paddle, the crinkle of a rope, all cast tiny clues. Not enough to read a full compass, but enough to sense a drift. You begin scanning the deck like a detective, looking for twitching lines of shade. One crewmate teases you, calling you shadow chaser. You grin. You've been called worse. Of course, when all else fails, there's another time-tested method. Don't rely on the sun at all. Fall back on the sea, the birds, the wind. The sun might be glorious, but it's also unreliable, especially when it's right overhead, scalding your brain and bleaching the world into uniform glare. The ocean, on the other hand, never tries to blind you. It just hums beneath your feet, giving you clues you have to earn. You begin to realize this is the magic. Not one single tool or star or godlike instinct, but a network of cues. The sun might fail you, but something else always speaks up. Maybe it's the shape of the waves, maybe the direction of fish swimming beneath the boat, maybe the way your oar blade feels different in the water. Navigation isn't one answer. It's 1,000 little maybes strung together into a direction. And so you squint through the shimmering afternoon, sweat sliding down your back, one hand shading your eyes, the other resting on warm wood. You're not sure exactly where you are, but you know where you're going. And for now, that's enough. The sun has dropped behind you, and the sky begins to darken. But this time, you're not looking up. You're looking down. As the light fades, something curious begins to happen beneath the surface of the sea. Patches of the water begin to glow. Not brightly, not like movie magic, but gently, soft pulses, hints of green-blue glimmer, like someone sprinkled fireflies into the waves. "Reef glow," someone whispers. You lean over the side and stare. The glow pulses in rhythm with the movement of the water, and the outline of something below emerges, faintly, shapes, structures, a submerged city of coral. You didn't even realize you were over a reef until it started to shine. This is another marvel of ancient Malay navigation, reading bioluminescence and light refraction over shallow reefs and coastal zones. It wasn't just beautiful, it was a breadcrumb trail. In areas with healthy coral or dense marine plankton, any movement, fish, paddle, even the boat's own wake, can cause tiny flashes of light. In absolute darkness, this becomes a navigational tool. Sailors could steer by the glowing boundaries of reefs they couldn't see by day. They'd read the brightness levels, the pattern of pulses, the depth of glow, to determine how near or far they were to land or danger. One crew member calls it the sea-breathing light. You like that. Historians still argue whether this technique was conscious or intuitive. Some believe bioluminescence was merely admired, not strategically used. But here, aboard this boat, it's obvious. The glow isn't just decoration, it's a map. A sailor tells you how, in some island chains, the coral was said to sing light songs at night. Entire routes were memorized by watching which parts of the sea glowed in which seasons. And if the glow was suddenly missing, something was wrong. Either a reef had died, or a storm was coming. You dip your hand into the water. Trails of silver flicker between your fingers, swirling like lazy stars. The feeling is electric and quiet, sacred and slippery all at once. It's hard to believe such magic exists outside fairy tales. And yet, there it is, glowing plankton reacting to your warmth and motion, tiny creatures lighting your way. The boat continues forward, and the glow shifts below, trailing your wake. You start to notice patterns, how the shine intensifies near reef shallows but dims over deeper water. It's not just about light, it's about color. Some glows are greenish, some bluer. The crew reads these shades like you'd read a tide chart. They know what kind of coral lies below based on the hue. You pass over one particularly bright patch, and the captain adjusts course just slightly. Later, you learn it was to avoid a known outcrop of razor-sharp coral just beneath the surface. Your wake would have glowed like a torch just before the hull crunched. So yes, this light matters. But it's not just reef glow that tells you things. Even the reflection of moonlight can act as a guide. In open water, where there's nothing to interrupt the silver streak, the moon casts a path straight to the horizon. If that streak suddenly breaks, warps, or disappears, you've passed something, an island, a reef, a school of fish, something solid enough to disturb the light. You test this later when the moon rises fat and clear. The silver path stretches behind the boat like an invitation, but at one point, it seems to kink slightly, a faint wobble near the right edge. A crewmate notices too, and nudges the rudder. Minutes later, a low sandbar shimmers just beneath the surface, barely visible. Your wake glows again, this time in warning. Some navigators even used fish behavior near these glowing zones. Schools of fish shimmer differently depending on whether they're near open ocean, reef, or mangrove shallows. A scattering flash of silvery panic might signal predators or human activity nearby. A lazy drift of faint sparks, peaceful feeding grounds. And peaceful grounds usually meant nearby land. You begin to think of this part of the ocean as your dreamland. Half visible, half imagined. A place where the rules of light are bent, but not broken. The crew continues their quiet work. One hums a lullaby, one untangles a fishing net, and another scratches a pattern into the wood rail. You ask what it is. A reef chart, he says. It's nothing like the maps you've seen, just a spiral, a few dots, and a line that might be a fish or a wave or a joke. Still, it works. When the clouds roll in and stars vanish again, the reef glow stays, soft, low, persistent. It doesn't illuminate your face, won't help you find your lost sandal, and certainly won't replace a compass. But it will whisper, and you're finally starting to understand its language. The last thing you see before lying down is a splash of fish near the stern, trailed by glowing echoes. A constellation beneath your boat. You fall asleep thinking, maybe we've been looking in the wrong direction all along. You wake to murmuring, soft, rhythmic, rising and falling like waves, but with a human lilt. At first, you think it's another lullaby, maybe a work song. But as you sit up, you see the entire crew gathered near the mast, seated cross-legged or leaning against bundles of rope. No sails need trimming. No storm threatens. This is something else. They are chanting, not for ceremony, not for entertainment, but for memory. Malay navigators passed down their routes not through parchment or ink, but through the spoken word, epic oral maps woven into chants, songs, and storytelling. Each line a direction, each verse a landmark. One sailor begins the chant, voice low and steady. The others hum along. You don't know the words, but the melody feels lived in. It's not musical in a Western sense, no choruses or catchy hooks, but it flows with purpose, a verbal current pulling you forward. You learn that each chant encodes a journey, not metaphorically, literally, A verse might reference the taste of wind over a southern island, the way birds fly from that point at dusk, or the fact that the water turns greenish near a particular reef. Together, the chant is the map, and it's not just direction, it's timing. Some chants are sung slowly, stretching over an entire day's sail. Others are recited at night to help the steersman stay awake and aligned. Speed up the chant, and you're going too fast. Lose the rhythm? You're drifting. Historians still debate the accuracy of these oral maps. Were they mnemonic devices for general orientation, or precise navigational texts with built-in safeguards? Probably both. What's clear is this: a sailor without a chant was as lost as one without stars. A crew member offers to teach you a verse. It starts with the phrase, "where the dolphins rise before the sun," and goes on to describe a sequence of swells, birds, and a double-shadowed island that marks the turning point west. You try to repeat it back. Your pronunciation is dreadful. But you remember it, and that's the point. You ask how they remember all of this. Thousands of verses, dozens of routes. One sailor shrugs. We sing them before sleep. We dream them. You try it later. Lying down, you hum the melody, and it loops again and again, like a cradle rocking you forward. It occurs to you, these weren't just maps. They were family legacies. Only certain people could carry certain chants, guarded like secrets, or passed with pride from parent to child. One sailor tells you his grandfather knew the 8-village passage chant, a long, winding route through a treacherous archipelago that only worked during a particular moon phase. You ask why he doesn't sing it. He just smiles. Not the right moon. There's a social layer to this too. When boats met at sea or in harbor, sailors traded stories, and sometimes verses. Not full chants, but hints. Hints of safer routes, changed reefs, new hazards. You imagine a network of oral data drifting from mouth to mouth, as useful and fast as any modern feed. Less reliable? Sure. But alive? One story makes you laugh. A sailor once tried to speed up a chant so he could reach a market island faster. He shaved off verses, skipped cues. He arrived not at the market, but on the far side of the wrong island, 2 days late and fishless. Don't cheat the song, the crew says, laughing. The sea hears you. Even the rhythm of rowing was synced to these chants. You hear a different melody now, slower, more percussive. This one's meant to accompany paddling through narrow straits. The tempo matches the tug of the current, keeping the rowers in tune, not just with each other, but with the sea. You look around and realize every crew member has a favorite. Some hum them absently. Others whistle them while cooking or coiling rope. One mutters his under his breath like a prayer. And in a way, it is a prayer. Not to a god, necessarily, but to the memory of direction. A plea to remember what the ocean is trying to say. You scribble a few lines of a chant phonetically in your notebook, though the melody escapes you. You'll forget the exact words by morning. But the rhythm? That stays. You fall into step with the chant, then with the boat, and finally with yourself. For the first time, you feel like you're moving with the journey, not just along it. The sea doesn't forget, and now neither will you. You reach a place in the voyage that feels less like motion and more like rhythm. The winds have settled into a sleepy pace. The sea no longer tosses so much as sways, and the crew, loosened by days of shared sun, salt, and stories, starts talking more. Not just about reefs or wind, but about food, trade, gossip, and whose cousin may or may not have married a rival island's turtle herder. This is when you discover that navigation wasn't just about the stars and birds. It was about people. Trade. Stories passed over bundles of cinnamon bark and salted fish. Malay sailors didn't sail in isolation. Their roots were rich with human connection, floating networks of information as vibrant and alive as the sea they crossed. The exchange of goods came with a side of news, and sometimes that news was more valuable than the cargo. You make your first stop at a small trade outpost, just a few thatched huts and a wooden jetty tucked into the curve of an islet. As the anchor drops with a soft splash, you're struck not by the stillness, but by the smell. Charcoal smoke, grilled fish, overripe bananas, the scent of human presence. You walk the creaking dock, listening. The sailors barter cloves for dried bananas, quire rope for a lump of fragrant resin, and in between the transactions, navigation clues. One trader mentions driftwood washing in from the west, carrying strange beetles. Another warns of a red tide 2 days southeast. A third chuckles and says a fleet of young, overconfident sailors got turned around near a cloud-covered cape and landed here by accident, one boat short. Everyone laughs a little too hard at that. This is coconut gossip, the informal knowledge that glues the region together. If you wanted to know which islands were hit by storms, which coastlines were overfished, or which routes had grown risky, you didn't wait for a royal decree. You listened to the person giving you your coconut. You paid attention when the old woman unspooling fishing net muttered something about jellyfish showing up early this year. Historians sometimes undervalue this kind of oral currency. They want maps, manuscripts, shipping logs. But ask a seasoned Malay sailor what the real map looks like, and he'll probably point to a group of uncles squatting around a clay pot, arguing about whether jackfruit tastes better grilled or stewed, and also which inlet now hides sandbars since the last moon cycle. You sit with the crew as they trade not just food, but language. Words shift here. A fruit might be called one thing in the north, another in the south. So too with reefs, currents, even wind. The sailors keep mental glossaries, swapping out phrases and names as they travel. It's like updating your phone's map app manually using slang. Someone gifts you a dried fish, too salty for your taste, but you accept it anyway. Along with it comes a comment. If the fish are schooling this thick here, it means the warm current has shifted east. You nod like you understand. Later, a crewmate translates, then points out that this is a good time to avoid certain channels. The current they're talking about, it changes twice a year, and with it, the safest path home. Trade goods themselves became navigational memory aids. Nutmeg came from a specific arc of islands. Patchouli leaves, highly sought after, grew only in a few coastal forests. If you smelled it in the air, you were close. If you didn't, you'd probably missed your turn. It wasn't just about locating a place. It was about knowing what that place meant. Was it friendly? Sacred? Prone to petty theft? You didn't want to find out too late. Trade gave you an excuse to land, but gossip gave you the knowledge to leave safely. You hear a tale about a young trader who arrived at an unfamiliar island with gifts of sugar and cloth. What he didn't know was that the island's last visitor had stolen goats. By the time he realized the reception was chilly, he'd already shared all his food. He left quickly, hungrier, wiser. By dusk, the trading is done. The boat is heavier with bundles of dried mango, woven mats, and a few clay pots that will probably break if you stare at them wrong. But more importantly, the conversation lingers. Someone shows you a sketch, a charcoal scribble on a bamboo slat. It looks like a chicken foot in a thunderstorm. You squint, confused. It's a mental map, they explain. Each fork is a route, each curve a reef. You ask if they'll keep it. "Nah," the sailor says. "I just need to see it once," then tosses it into the fire. You feel a twinge of loss, but they don't, because the map wasn't in the charcoal. It was in the memory, now layered on top of story, now shared over roasted plantains. As you sail away that evening, the boat creaking under its new weight and richer with murmured warnings, you realize something. Sometimes, finding your way isn't about knowing where to go. It's about knowing who's already been there, and who's willing to whisper about it while handing you a mango. The wind sharpens like a thin blade just after midnight. It begins as a low hiss in the sailcloth, like someone sighing through their teeth, and then the temperature drops fast. The air goes from warm and lazy to brisk, urgent. You're up before the crew calls, already pulling on the overshirt that still smells faintly of dried fish and rain. A storm is coming, not a full typhoon. Not yet anyway, but a solid, testing squall. One of those early wet season tantrums the sea throws when it's tired of being calm. The crew moves with focused grace. No panic, no rush. Sails are reefed, lines are checked. You're handed a rope and told simply, "Hold. Don't try to fix. Seems fair." You grip it like your job depends on it, which technically, it does. Malay sailors didn't fight storms in the way you might expect. No battering forward, no desperate sprint for cover. They had what they called drift strategies, methods of surviving, not conquering, the weather. The philosophy? Let the sea lead. You don't argue with an angry ocean. You let it carry you, with control, without resistance. One of these techniques was laying a hull, adjusting the boat to sit sideways to the wind with minimal sail, letting it drift while staying stable. The boat rides the storm like a feather balanced on wind. It's eerie. You're not steering. You're floating. But it works. The hull rises and dips evenly. No violent tossing, just a long, slow roll, like the boat is breathing through it. There are tricks, too. Fish bones, believe it or not. Yes, fish bones. One crewmate pulls a charm from his satchel, a dried fish head tied with black thread and a shard of coral. To keep the sea spirits sleepy, he says, eyes twinkling. He ties it to the mast. You smirk, but also, you're kind of glad it's there. Historians argue whether these talismans held actual navigational value or were more psychological armor, anchors for calm in a world without control. But on this boat, belief matters. Whether or not the fishbone can charm the waves, the sailors trust it, and that trust keeps them focused. You're told to watch the rain, not the sea, not the sail, but the rain itself, the way it falls. Straight down? Good. At an angle? Adjust. If it starts to swirl or reverse direction, that means the storm's center is nearby. You squint through the downpour and try to interpret its dance. At one point, someone starts humming again. Not a chant this time, but a low, looping tone. It's not for you. It's for them. For focus. For rhythm. They work in time with it, checking ropes, shifting weight, balancing the boat like a waiter carrying soup bowls on a trampoline. Then comes a deep rumble. Not thunder, waves. One sailor taps his foot against the deck. Rebound swells, he says. There's a landmass nearby. We might drift close. It's a warning. Storms can throw you toward danger as easily as away from it. To counter this, they use something called sea anchors. Bundles of rope, cloth, or old nets dragged behind the boat to create drag and slow the drift. A simple tool, but effective. The idea isn't to stop, you can't, but to steer by slowing, like pulling the emergency brake on a sled. The storm builds, but never explodes. It's one of those long, muttering tantrums. Wind, rain, and choppy swells testing the crew's patience. You brace your knees, soaked to the bone, fingers cramping around the rope. You'd be panicking if everyone else weren't so maddeningly calm. And it's not just weather sense, it's memory. They know this storm. They've seen its brothers. One man claims he can smell which direction the tail end will pass, based on the tang of ozone and mud in the air. You raise an eyebrow. He sniffs dramatically. Southwest. A few hours later, the rain lightens. The wind pulls back, like a curtain tugged away. And sure enough, you're still afloat. The sky opens in streaks, morning gray. The sea, stirred but not spiteful, smooths itself again. One by one, the crew stretches their limbs, wrings out their clothes, and nods. No celebration, no high fives, just a deep breath. One sailor fishes out a jar of ginger and passes it around. You take a piece. It burns and soothes at once. You realize you've learned something crucial. Storms are not failures. Getting tossed, wet, off course, it's all part of the process. You're not conquering the sea. You're dancing with it. And sometimes it leads. There's a story told as the sun rises about a voyage that drifted 3 days off course during a storm. No landmarks, no stars, but they made it to a tiny, unexpected island that wasn't even on their chant route. They named it Place the Rain Led. They still stop there sometimes for mangoes. You like that. Maybe not every detour is a disaster. Land appears not as a bold outline, but a suggestion. At first, it's just a strange texture on the horizon, where the smooth line of sky meets something slightly lumpier, not sharp, not sudden, just different. Your eyes strain against the haze. You think it might be clouds, or a trick of the light, but the crew already knows. They've shifted. The way they handle the ropes is lighter now, confident. There's a scent in the air, wet bark, cooked starch, maybe grilled fish if you're being hopeful. You're nearing a place you've never seen, an island that wasn't on any map because, well, you never had one. The chant you learned earlier ends with a curious phrase, something like, "The river sleeps with its back to the sun." You now understand what it meant. A small river mouth, shaded from the morning light, barely visible except for the silty color the water makes as it curls into the sea. That's your marker. You're making landfall, and you're doing it like they did, by scent, by swell, by slow realization. Approaching an unknown island was always a gamble. Ancient Malay sailors didn't assume they were welcome. You'd read the signs long before you heard a drumbeat or saw smoke. Were fishing boats nearby? Did birds circle the treetops anxiously? Were there canoes hauled onto the shore, or none at all? You spot a few dugout canoes along the beach, overturned, drying. A good sign. It means people live here. Probably. And they aren't hiding. Also good. You hope. Still, the approach is cautious. The crew shifts into quiet mode. The sail is dropped halfway. No loud jokes, no music. Just listening. One sailor leans over the side and dips his hand into the water. He rubs his fingers together, sniffs them, then nods. Still brackish. That means the river mouth is near. The taste of fresh water mixing with salt, like lukewarm tea brewed from seaweed and leaves, becomes a signal that the coast is close. And that land might be welcoming. Historians often focus on the grand landfalls, major ports, trading hubs, empires with towering gates. But more often, landfall was this: a quiet inlet, a low beach, a question in the form of trees, the kind of place that doesn't announce itself but waits to see who's coming. You notice the crew scanning the tree line. One points to a thick cluster of trees. "No coconuts," he says. You ask why that matters. means not many people live here or they're new. Coconuts don't just appear, they're planted, tended, shared. An island without them might be wild or simply unclaimed. A faint sound rolls over the water. A drum, number A knocking sound. Wood on wood. Rhythmic. It could be pestles in a mortar. That means cooking. And that means people. Good news? Probably. Malay sailors had a whole repertoire of strategies for arriving in peace. Approach at midday, not dawn or dusk. No surprises. Lower your sail to show you're not trying to escape. Bring a small offering, salt, cloth, or just a hand raised in greeting. Sometimes they'd sing a short verse from a known chant. If someone on shore responded with the right answer, you knew you were among familiar culture, if not friends. You rehearse the chant under your breath, just in case. The boat slows. One of the younger crew slips into the water with a short paddle and swims ahead. A scout. His job isn't to sneak, it's to announce, to show he's unarmed, to see who comes out of the trees. It feels like theater, because it is. The ancient sea was not just currents and fish, it was social space, and you had to know the script. The scout returns, a nod. 2 men, 1 child, friendly, fishing baskets. The tone is calm. No weapons, no shouting, no frantic paddling. You breathe out. You edge toward the shore, watching the color of the water change, from deep ocean blue to cloudy jade. You can now see the bottom, sandy, dotted with black sea cucumbers, one of which wiggles in protest as your boat glides above it. The sail flaps once, lazily. The boat sighs into stillness. Then silence, just birds, insects, a faint rustle from the trees. The crew drops anchor, more like a heavy basket full of rocks, and begins preparing the small dugout for landfall. You're invited to come, of course, but you hesitate. After all this? After the stars, the storms, the fish bones and chants and glowing water? It feels surreal that you're here, that it worked. The navigator, the one who taught you to read the wind with your skin, claps your shoulder. Now, he says, you guess if they have coconuts. You grin. They smell like they do. He laughs, satisfied. The canoe bumps gently against the sand. You step out into ankle-deep water. Warm, silty. You half expect applause from the trees. Instead, a small child watches you silently from the shade of a pandanus tree, holding a fish trap and chewing something that's probably not gum. Welcome, you think. You made it. No map, no GPS, just rhythm, scent, story, and stars. And it was enough. Leaving is harder than arriving. Not because of resistance. No one's chasing you off the island. In fact, your brief stay was oddly warm, a shared coconut, a traded tool, laughter at your awkward attempts to climb a wet canoe. The problem is psychological. You've been moving toward land for so long that the idea of turning away from it feels wrong. Illogical, even. Like walking backwards after finishing a race. But that's how it works. In seafaring, every arrival is also the beginning of departure. The crew doesn't linger. These are not vacationers. They've restocked their water, tucked away bundles of smoked fish, traded stories, absorbed what they could. Now it's time to leave. And with no maps, no marked trail, you're relying entirely on the old senses. Muscle memory, smell, bird paths, swell direction, and maybe, if you're lucky, the ghosts of your own footprints drifting faintly behind you on the tide. You push off, and the boat glides free. The trees shrink. The child with the fish trap waves once, then disappears behind the greenery. The sea, waiting as always, opens its mouth to swallow you whole once again. Going back is not the same as going there. The wind has changed. The swells are shorter. The birds move differently. You're retracing a path that was never drawn, only felt. Malay sailors used different cues on return voyages, partly because conditions change, but also because you are changed. You see things you didn't before. A particular star now seems a few fingers lower at night. The scent of rain carries differently. Even the fish behave oddly, as though they're swimming the other way, mocking your hesitation. This is where instinct really kicks in. One crew member sits near the stern with a piece of coconut shell filled with water. He floats a small chip of wood in it, flicks the shell gently, then watches the spin. It's not a compass, it's a vibe check, a directional nudge. He's watching how the drift swirls in miniature, mirroring the full sea. This is not pseudoscience, it's pattern recognition at its most poetic. Historians have recorded tools like this in scattered forms, floating leaf bowls, sand rings, even knots in a sail that tighten or loosen depending on wind direction. Some scholars argue these were just superstitions, while others see them as mnemonic triggers, like a sailor's version of tying a ribbon around your finger. Something to jog memory, real or symbolic. You're assigned to wave watch again, back at your spot near the bow. This time the swells feel familiar. Not identical, but close enough that your legs adjust naturally. You know when to lean, when to plant your feet. You no longer need to ask what a chop means. You just feel it in your knees. And yet, it's quieter now, not the silence of fear, but of focus. On the way out, everyone talked more, banter, laughter, chant. On the return, voices grow softer. You're tuned in now. No one needs to tell you when the swell is wrong. You all know it. You pass a floating branch, a different kind this time, thicker, with moss growing along one side. That growth tells you which way it floated. One sailor plucks it up and uses the slime line as a compass. If the moss clings to the left, it drifted west. You're going east. That checks out. The wind is trickier on the return. Crosswinds this time. Less helpful. So the sails pulled in tighter, the angle sharp, almost stubborn. But this boat was made for this kind of decision. Unlike Western deep hull vessels, Malay ships, like the Jong or Prau, were designed to pivot with ease, catching even difficult winds with clever asymmetrical sail settings. It's a dance, one you're now clumsily a part of. You start recognizing things that weren't obvious before. A pattern of clouds over an open channel, a set of rocks barely skimming the surface, a certain color in the water, greenish-gray like overcooked tea, that tells you you've crossed into another current. Navigation home wasn't about reversal, it was reweaving. You remember one sailor saying, "The sea is never the same road twice." You assumed it was metaphor. Now you see its operational reality. Tides shift, wind flips. Your return voyage is its own beast, and it requires faith, not in gods necessarily, but in the idea that remembering well enough is almost the same as knowing. A pod of dolphins appears around dusk. This time, no one claps or cheers. They're a good sign, yes, but also a marker. These dolphins tend to stay within a 30-kilometer corridor of open water near a particular current edge. You're entering it again. That means the coastline, your coastline, is just a night away. The stars emerge and you grin. They're in the wrong place now, tilted, cockeyed, but still recognizable. You catch yourself lifting a hand and measuring with your fingers. A small satisfaction stirs. You're beginning to trust what can't be seen directly. You navigate now in glances, hints, ripples, shadows. You're tired. Salt has crusted your sleeves. Your lips are dry. But you also feel something like a low hum in your chest. orientation. Even without signs, you know where you're heading, and more importantly, you know why. Everything gets weird on the 17th day, not dangerous, just off. The sea, the sky, even your own sense of balance, it all feels slightly askew, like reality is wearing mismatched shoes. You wake up to a fog so thick you can't see your own knees. The sky and the sea merge into one pale blur, and the boat floats like a dream inside a marble. The air smells cold and slightly metallic. Not a storm, not a calm, just a gray hush, thick enough to butter. The crew doesn't like this. Malay sailors knew how to handle storms, swells, even dead calm. But fog was unpredictable. It muffled not just sound but instincts. No birds, no stars, no sun, no clues. The captain says nothing, just paces slowly, like a man trying to remember whether he left the stove on at sea. The rest of the crew moves cautiously. No jokes, no chants. You sit and listen. The waves slap against the hull at odd intervals, like they're confused too. You can't tell if you're moving fast or just bobbing in place. A slight current presses from the side, but there's no reference point to gauge it. Your own heartbeat seems too loud. One sailor drops a shell into the water and listens for the splash, then another. He's trying to gauge depth by delay. The idea is, if the splash echoes too soon, you're over a reef. If it doesn't echo at all, you're in deep trouble, literally. No echo, deep sea, still drifting. Then the compass in your head, which you've only recently started trusting, wobbles. Your sense of direction flips. You were sure the bow pointed east. Now you feel like it's west. Or maybe north. Or maybe the sea has rotated without your permission. Even the birds, when they do appear, seem confused. A pair of terns loop overhead in tight circles, landing on the sail's edge, squawking. One poops on the captain's shoulder. A bad omen? He just brushes it off and mutters something you decide not to ask about. Historians refer to this as magnetic deviation days, rare pockets where the ancient navigators reported odd behavior in both their instruments and their instincts. Not magnetic fields in the modern sense, but disruptions, moods of the sea. Some even linked it to undersea volcanoes or ancient spirits. You don't know what you believe, but the air definitely feels like it has opinions today. You try to help, scanning the fog, checking the tension in the ropes, but everything's off. The boat creaks wrong. The paddle drags wrong. One crew member swears the water tastes slightly different. Less salt, more iron. He claims that's a sign of underwater rock shelves nearby. You believe him. It's the kind of day where even a whisper feels authoritative. There's a short debate over whether to anchor and wait it out or keep drifting. They choose to drift, barely. The sail is tightened, but not full. The goal is slow movement, like you're sneaking past something ancient and cranky. That's when the light starts acting up. Not real light, more like the lack of it. Shadows fall where they shouldn't. A faint halo circles the sail even though there's no visible sun. Someone describes it as cloud light, the ghost of sunlight filtered through 100 layers of wet wool. One sailor tells a story of a fog so disorienting, a rival crew looped for 3 days in the same lagoon, convinced they were crossing open sea. They only realized their error when they spotted their own fish trap floating by. No one talks for a while after that. Your mind starts to play tricks. You swear you see a silhouette on the horizon. Tall, maybe a sail. You blink, and it's gone. Maybe it was a bird or a dream. You don't mention it. Then you hear a sound, faint, rhythmic, like distant drums. You sit up straight. The crew listens too. One sailor shakes his head. Wave echo, he says. Sometimes when the air's thick like this, Sound gets folded. Still, his fingers tap the rail nervously. The fog finally lifts just before sunset, slowly, like a stage curtain rising after a long, awkward intermission. The sun peeks through, reluctantly, and the color returns to the sea. Blue, real blue. Birds begin flying more confidently. The captain yawns like he knew it would end all along. You don't ask questions, you just exhale. The wind picks up, the sail is raised fully again, and you begin moving with conviction. The crew slowly resumes their hums, their small chatter. Someone makes a joke about the poop-laden bird being a blessing after all. And you? You sit cross-legged and take a long drink of rainwater, staring at the fading fog bank behind you. You don't know what that was, but you made it through. The final morning arrives softly, like the last page of a book rustling closed in a breeze. You don't notice it at first. You're still bleary from sleep, still scratching a fresh line of sunburn on the back of your neck. But then someone points, and there it is. A familiar ridge of trees, silhouetted against the blue haze. The same slope you saw disappear weeks ago when you first set out. That little dip between two hills? You've dreamed it. The beach that curves like a half-moon bite. That's the same stretch you sat on, scared out of your sandals, wondering how anyone found their way through all that water. Now you're back. But not the same. Malay sailors spoke often of wake memory. Not the way we remember something that happened, but the feeling a place leaves behind. The wake you carve through water doesn't last, of course, but the knowledge of that motion does. And when you return, the ocean seems to recognize you. So does the crew. They stand taller, faces leaner from salt and sun, their movements calmer. One of them throws you a fishtail as a joke, your reward for not falling overboard, for not throwing up, after day 3 at least, for learning how to stand like the wind means something. As the boat glides toward shore, you notice the details more clearly than before. The swell pattern near the river mouth, the way the birds cluster above a certain mangrove grove, the color of the sand, less golden, more warm gray. You're remembering forward now. Every motion of the boat is familiar. The tightening of the ropes, the flutter of the sail as it bows one last time, the way someone says steady under their breath, like a habit, not a command. And then your foot hits land. It's just wet sand. You've stood on it 100 times. But now, after thousands of kilometers stitched together by instinct, chant, wind, and wing, you feel the difference. You understand the horizon differently. You know it never ends. You know you could go again. Maybe you will. Maybe you already have. And now, we're home. The boat is quiet. The waves are whispering to the shore, and the sails hang still, no longer catching wind, but resting, just like you. The journey we've taken wasn't about the destination. It never really is. It was about learning how to listen, to waves, to birds, to rain, to stories carried in the folds of someone's voice. You've floated through fog, sung with the stars, tasted direction in the air, and watched firelight flicker in the sea. You've stepped into the quiet legacy of sailors who navigated not with tools, but with trust, with memory, with heart. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you still feel the hum of the boat beneath your feet? The faint warmth of the sun on your shoulders? The hush of distant birds wheeling overhead? You don't need a compass anymore. You've found your rhythm. It's in your breath, in the quiet between thoughts, in the stillness that's settling around you right now. And as the waves roll on, slow and soft, let yourself drift too. You've traveled far tonight, farther than most, and now There's nothing left to do. The stars are still out there. The sea is still singing. But for now, you can rest. Let the tide rock you gently. Let sleep carry you home.